I traded my mother for a sack of corn. Yeah, I did that. And the part that keeps me up at night is she didn't fight. She didn't even raise her voice. Just smoothed the hem of her faded skirt like a woman checking a lock she's trusted for years and nodded, as if I'd finally given her permission to do what she came here to do. The porch boards were warm under our feet, the air brittle with drought, and I remember the way dust hovered in sunbeams like ghosts that refused to settle. You know what I mean. I said we had nothing left, no stock, no grain, no credit at the store, and Mama, Cora Maddox, looked past my shoulder toward the dead pasture and said, "Calm as Sunday. I understand, child," and offered terms a man could brag about in church. Kitchen work, a pallet by the stove, a roof that didn't leak, while my mother kept patting the lower edge of that skirt as if a heartbeat lived there. And I told myself it was dignity, nothing more, a woman saving the last good cloth from splinters. Eli flicked the reins, the wagon lurched, and my mother didn't look afraid. She looked relieved. Lord help me, like a prisoner stepping into a carriage she'd ordered months ago. The sack of corn felt heavier than sin. And every time I lifted it, I heard the porch groan and wondered if that was the house or my soul. 3 days we boiled those kernels into a gray grief that clung to our ribs and didn't fill the hollows. And every swallow tasted like betrayal. And every empty chair was my mother's hands smoothing a secret. On the 4th morning, I went hunting scrap at the Henderson place. Wind flapping dead curtains. "Won't let the dress be washed," one said, and I felt the ground tilt, because Cora wasn't vain and she wasn't a hoarder. She was precise, and precise folk don't waste their hands on nothing. I started walking without deciding to, over the ridge, through heat that pressed behind my eyes, because a thought once started will cross a desert faster than a horse. And mine said my mother had guarded something more than cloth. Near Thompson's yard, I crouched behind a spill of fence posts and watched figures move through rectangles of window light. And then a rider came hard from the north, threw his reins to a kid at the pump, and pushed into the house like a man whose news has the law running at its heels. I crept closer, breath shallow, and caught what I needed. Millbrook Bank, missing cash, federal marshals, descriptions that didn't choose a face so much as a habit, someone harmless. Someone who could carry value in plain sight, while men thanked her for sweeping up after supper. An older woman might be holding it, the rider said, and my mouth went dry. Because my mother's calm had never been about my shame. It had been about her schedule. Thompson cursed, talked fast about running a clean outfit. And if I warned her, the noose could widen to fit us both. I slid along the wall to a kitchen window and saw her at the table with a neatness that could cut a man, needle flashing, lips pressed soft. Skirt pooled like a quiet lake. And when Thompson came near with a smile that showed too many teeth, she looked up, and I swear to you, she looked almost pleased. "Seems that hem of yours is mighty dear," he said, playing friendly, circling like he'd trained on cattle, and Mama, still Cora to me then, smoothed the edge one last time and said, "A woman keeps her dignity how she can," which is the kind of line you deliver when your next move is already wrapped in paper. He mentioned the sewing. She let the silence answer for her. Then she stood and undid the side ties with fingers that never shook, stepped free of the skirt, and set it at his feet like bait. He tore the seams, green flashed, bills slithered across floorboards. But what I felt was confusion because my mother, bare to the shins and straight-backed as a judge, looked relieved, like a clock striking the hour it was built for. "That money isn't Millbrook," she said, voice even. "It's bait." And I felt something in my chest unhook because of course it was. Of course she'd let me trade her. Of course she'd ride quiet as cargo into the exact parlor where the fish she meant to catch kept his whiskey. Thompson's grin slipped, and he asked what kind of game. And the answer came like cold iron. One that finds men who sell human lives for profit. The rider who'd brought the news shifted by the sideboard. And for the first time I got a clean look at him. Wet boots, dust to the knees. A scar that tugged his smile off-center. And the kid from the pump hovered in the back with a bucket he'd forgotten to empty. The kid caught my eye through the glass and gave the smallest shake of his head, a keep still meant only for me. And later I'd learn he had a name, Jonah Reed, and a badge tucked beneath his shirt. A child-faced Pinkerton runner who'd been slipping letters between my mother and the marshals for months. Yeah, that happened. Thompson reached for his gun and learned the second truth of the afternoon. My mother's age never measured her speed, because she pinned his wrist and leaned close enough to salt his breath. And the man went pale like he'd seen a ghost. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered, and everything in me went quiet as a church, because ghosts are one thing and names are another. And the one he said wasn't Cora. Catherine Maddox died in that fire. He stammered, and Mama's grip hardened. And she corrected him with a fury that had waited 15 years. Catherine Morrison lived. My knees gave out, and I caught myself on the sill. And all the small lies of poverty. How we couldn't sell the quilt. How we couldn't leave this county. How her letters always came without return address. Rearranged themselves into a pattern that looked horribly like strategy. She laid it out plain. Deeds forged, land stolen. A house burned to silence the witness who wasn't her at all, because her sister had worn her dress that night and died in her bed. And she told him she had ledgers and names and dates, and that the money at his boots would trace a circle around everyone who thought desperation was a marketplace. Hoofbeats answered her like the horizon had been waiting. And 6 riders fanned into the yard, coats open, badges bright where the sun had grace left to shine, and the lead man, Marshal Silas Ward. Not even surprised to find a parlor tiled with currency and a man sweating guilt into the floorboards, and Mama, Catherine, nodded and said the records were in the desk beneath the false bottom. Because of course she knew the exact place he kept the bones of other people's lives. Ward came in, eyes sweeping, chin tipping once toward Jonah by the doorway. "There you are, kid." And when Thompson tried to shake himself into rage, he found shackles where his fists used to be. He called us names meant to hurt, and failed. Because you can't wound a truth once it says its own name. And Catherine kept standing like a woman who had nothing left to trade. I stepped inside then because the door had ceased to be a wall for me. Because there are moments when your feet choose the ground they'll answer for. And I told Ward I had sold my mother for corn. And asked if I would tell the truth cleanly when the time came. I said I would. Catherine, for the first time all day, let herself sag. And in that sag I saw not a schemer, but a mother who had carried revenge like a second heartbeat and love like a hidden blade, and hoped she'd never have to use either on the child standing in her sight line. They took Thompson down the steps with his boots slipping on money, which is fitting, and the wind lifted a handful of bills and floated them across the yard like tired butterflies. And I thought about how paper can buy a life or set one on fire, and the difference is often a woman with a needle and a plan. Ward thanked Catherine with the businesslike grace men in his job learned before they learned to sleep. Said her cooperation would be noted. Said a judge would be glad to read the pages that ended a little empire of forged deeds and human freight. Then turned to me and said I'd likely walk because starvation isn't a conspiracy. It's a fact. We stood on the porch where this began, the sun slipping toward a horizon cut with fence wire and prayer, and Mama, no, Catherine, touched my wrist so lightly I could have convinced myself I imagined it, and said she was sorry for the years of quiet lies. That every hunger she let us live through had been part of a long game she sometimes hated as much as the man she was hunting. And the words felt like a door we might open when winter ended. The marshals rode out trailing dust, Thompson's wagon clattering toward a future with bars in it. Jonah swung up on a horse too big for his frame and gave me a look that said there are different kinds of families, the ones you're born to and the ones that build themselves under pressure. And you don't always know what you've got until somebody kicks in a door. We watched the yard empty, bills stuck in tumbleweed, stitched together with threads scavenged from the very harm it intends to end, and maybe that's why it holds. So tell me, if you were in my boots, starving, cornered, and what do communities owe the most vulnerable when the powerful turn survival into commerce? Drop your take below, right, wrong, somewhere messy in the middle, because I'm listening. And somewhere out past the ridge, I promise you, so is the wind.